Well, hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're located today. My name is Eliot Harper, and welcome to the first of a two-part course on server-side JavaScript for Marketing Cloud. So I want to start off by thanking you personally for attending today and registering. In doing so, you've helped raise over $7,000 US dollars for UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, which is a fantastic result. So thank you once again. Well, let's get underway. Now, before we begin, for the benefit of those who don't know me, I'm a senior marketing technology architect at CloudKettle. And I've authored several books on Salesforce Marketing Cloud, including my latest book that we see on the right-hand side here, the AMP-Script Guide, that I co-authored with Adam Spriggs. I'm a Salesforce MVP, and I've received this award from Salesforce for the past 5 consecutive years. So it's really a privilege to receive that recognition. I've been working very closely in Marketing Cloud for over 8 years now. I'm very active in the user community. I regularly speak at Salesforce events and community events. I help write many of the exam questions in the Salesforce certifications. And I'm a co-organizer of the Marketing Cloud Developer User Group, which I started in 2015. Well, let me start by explaining what you can expect to learn today. In today's session, I'll start by explaining what server-side JavaScript is and why you'd use it. Then I'll spend the remainder of our session explaining the JavaScript language syntax and fundamentals. As unless you have foundational knowledge in JavaScript, then you won't be able to write SSJS. And then in tomorrow's session, you'll be able to use this newly found foundational knowledge to write SSJS, when we'll look at common SSJS functions and use cases. But firstly, what exactly is SSJS and why would you use it? Well, server-side JavaScript, or SSJS, is a scripting language for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. And while AMP-Script is a proprietary scripting language that enables sophisticated content personalization across channels, SSJS is based on JavaScript, which is the world's most widely used programming language. And SSJS enables you to extend the capabilities of Marketing Cloud through an extensive set of functions. There are many use cases for SSJS, which primarily focusing on marketing automation through the ability to include script activities in an automation, API integration for both external APIs and Marketing Cloud APIs, and web development in Cloud Pages through an extensive set of functions for doing things like getting and setting cookies, form data, HTTP headers, and much more. And while JavaScript can seem intimidating when you're getting started, it's actually very easy to learn if you just take time to understand the language syntax and fundamentals. Now, for the remainder of today's session, I'll be teaching you JavaScript. I won't be teaching you everything about JavaScript. It's a very comprehensive language. Instead, I'll focusing on the key concepts and language fundamentals that you need to understand in order to use SSJS in Marketing Cloud. So let's get started with some fundamentals. I'll start by explaining the syntax used for strings in JavaScript. So similar to AMP-Script, strings are text-based values and can contain letters, numbers, symbols, and punctuation. Now, in JavaScript, we need to enclose strings with a pair of either single or double quotation marks. It doesn't matter which, it's just really personal preference. Now, I'll be discussing the other parts of this code later, but for now, let's just focus on the characters in bold. Here's an example of a string. Numbers or integers don't need to be contained in quotation marks, as we see here. But perhaps you want to go and use quotation marks inside a string. So to do that, you'll either need to use opposite quotation marks, both inside and outside. That means that strings containing single quotes need to use double quotes And obviously strings containing double quotes need to use single quotes, as we see here. Alternatively, a backslash character can be used to escape a quotation mark. The following variable produces the same result. Next, let's talk about statements. In programming, a computer program is a list of instructions to be executed by a computer. And in a programming language, these programming instructions are called statements. And a JavaScript program is essentially a list of programming statements. Now, the semicolon in JavaScript is used to separate statements, but it can be omitted if the statement is followed by a line break. Let's take a look at an example. So here we're defining variables. Now we'll discuss variables next, but I want to focus on the semicolon. And in this case, the semicolon is actually optional as we're using line breaks. Now, while it's not required, it's good practice to use semicolons after a statement, which will just make your code more readable and portable. So, if you want to go and minify your code, for example, then you want to ensure that the interpreter can read your code. Just like this next example. So here, we need to ensure that semicolons are used as we have two statements on a single line. Now, let's move on to variables. In programming, a variable is a container for storing a data value. And as its name implies, the value can vary, so it can be changed at any time. Variables are declared with a var keyword, followed by a user-defined name. A value is then assigned to the variable using an equal operator. Also, it's worth mentioning that JavaScript allows variable declaration without a var keyword. And when you do so, it provides a global scope. However, it's generally not recommended to declare a variable first without declaring a var keyword, as it can accidentally overwrite an existing global variable. So in this example here, we can see I've assigned two strings as a variable. I have make as the variable value Volvo and model as XC90. Now let's talk about comments. JavaScript comments can be used to explain JavaScript code and make your code more readable. JavaScript comments can also be used to prevent execution when testing alternative code. Comments can either span a single line or traverse multiple lines. Here's an example of a single line comment. Single line comments start with 2 / characters, and any text after this character pattern until the end of the line will be ignored by JavaScript. That is, the code inside it will not be executed. And comments can also traverse multiple lines. So here's an example of a multi-line comment. Multi-line comments start with this / characters and end with a matching delimiter pattern. And any text between the syntax pattern will also be ignored by JavaScript. Note that this common syntax is identical to both AmpScript and CSS. Now, let's talk about objects. In JavaScript, objects are king. If you understand objects, then you pretty much understand JavaScript. Let me explain how it works. So in real life, let's say we have a car, and a car is an object. And a car has things like properties, which are like things like weight and color and year and an engine, and also methods, which would be things like start or stop or drive. In the previous example, we defined a string as a variable. Now this time, we're going to use an object. An object can also contain a string, but can also hold more than one value. Object properties in JavaScript are contained in curly brackets and are written as name-value pairs separated by a colon. Note that as I explained earlier, only string values need to be enclosed in quotation marks. Boolean, that's true, false values, or numeric values, like in this case, this year integer value, don't require quotation marks. And as you can see, this syntax provides a human-readable declaration of multiple object properties along with their corresponding values. Now let's take a look at how we can go and use this object and retrieve a property from it. In this scenario, we're going to use an SSJS core function to output the car model. I'm not going to really explain this function now, as we'll cover this in our next session. However, the key thing to note here is that the object properties are expressed in dot notation, where we first define the car object, followed by the property that we want to retrieve, in this case, model. So this write function is commonly used for testing and debugging your code, as we'll see tomorrow. Here, the value XC90 is displayed from the model, and this will be output on the page or in the message. So we've talked about objects and their properties. Now let's talk about methods. In JavaScript, methods are actions that can be performed on objects. Let's take a look at an example. So once again, in a simple scenario, we're going to use a built-in JavaScript string method to transform the car make property to uppercase. Note the object, property, and method pattern. So firstly, we've already gone and defined the object as car, this car variable. And then we've also defined the property within the object, which is make. And finally, we go and define the method or action to apply to that property. In this case, we're going to use the JavaScript toUppercase method. As a result, as its name implies, the method converts our string to uppercase letters. And in our message or on our page, the make will be displayed in uppercase. You'll also note that the method that I've used is suffixed with an empty parenthesis. That's because some JavaScript methods allow you to pass parameters to the method. And I'll show you examples of this later. But in this case, there are no parameters supported by this JavaScript method, which is why it's empty. Now, so far, we've looked at strings and also how objects can be used to define multiple values in a variable. Now let's talk about arrays. So in JavaScript, an array is a special variable which can hold more than one value at a time. Perhaps you want to loop through the cars and find a specific one. The solution would be to store the values in an array. Arrays are enclosed in square brackets, and the values are comma delimited. You can then access a value in an array by referring to the index number. Note that the starting index in an array is always 0. So the syntax for retrieving a value from an array is to suffix the index number in square brackets after the array name, as we see here. So in this instance, 0 will return the first value in the array. 1 will return the second one, for example, Ford. But in this scenario, the value fiat will be output, as that's again, it's the array is a 0-based index, and we're getting the first item in the array. So the output is fiat. And of course, if we change the index number to 1, the second item in the array will be returned, in this case, Ford, and so on. Before we progress, I just thought it would be fun to have a quick quiz on what we've learned so far. And I've included several test questions just to check everyone's paying attention. Now, you don't have to go and answer these. This isn't a kind of name and shame exercise. So you can just answer them in your head if you want. You don't have to post them in the Q&A or chat panel. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this question here. So the answer I'm looking for is D, fruit, as we've defined an object named fruit, and so that's the object, and you'd reference it just by writing fruit. Let's now take a look at this question. Now, as I just explained, arrays use a zero-based index. So 0 returns the first value, 1 returns the second, which can be a bit confusing if you're not familiar with JavaScript. But in this scenario, the answer would be B, 2001. Now let's progress our JavaScript knowledge and learn about operators. An operator in a programming language is a symbol that tells an interpreter to perform a specific mathematical, relational, or logical operation and produce a final result. And JavaScript includes different operator types, which can be used for conditional evaluation. In this module, we'll discuss different operators and their behavior. There are a total of 5 operator types in JavaScript, which are arithmetic operators, comparison operators, logical operators, assignment operators, and the conditional operator. Now, I've listed all operator types in JavaScript really for the sake of completeness. However, assignment and conditional operators start to slip beyond the boundaries of JavaScript fundamentals. So for the purpose of this introductory session, we won't be covering them today, as they're generally reserved for more advanced SSJS use cases. Let's start with the arithmetic operators. So here are all the different arithmetic operators. You're probably already familiar with the first 4. So let me just go and explain the remaining 3. So the modulus operator returns the remainder of two operands. That is, it produces the remainder of an integer division. And I'll show you an example of this in the next slide. The increment operator increases an operand value by 1, and the decrement operator decreases the value by 1. Okay, let's take a look at some examples then. The following code demonstrates how arithmetic operators perform different tasks on operands. I'll give you a minute to read these operators to ensure you understand how their resulting value is calculated. Let's just take a look at that modulus operator. So we've got 5 modulus 2. So obviously 2 is divisible twice, but there's 1 remaining. So that is why it returns 1. And having a look at the last 2, we have the variable x is equal to 5. So by including this increment operator, it's going to increase this to 6. And this is very useful when using loops, which we'll look at later today. And then obviously the decrement operator has the reverse effect. It decrements by 1. Now, while arithmetic operators are used to perform calculations on numeric values, the plus operator, referred to as the unary plus operator in JavaScript, performs concatenation operations when one of the operands is of a string type. The following example demonstrates how this operator performs different tasks on operands. So as you can see, when one of the operands is of a string type, then the values are concatenated together. So in this case, we've got A equals 5 and D is 10. So the bottom example, A plus D is 15. But as soon as I go and involve a string type and try to perform a calculation on that, it instead concatenates those values together. Now let's talk about comparison operators. In programming, comparison operators are used to compare two values or operands. The result of the evaluation will be a Boolean result that is either true or false. And there are 8 comparison operators available in JavaScript, which are listed here. And you're probably already familiar with most of them. So let's go and take a look at how they evaluate operands. So here you can see that I've gone and defined 4 variables. So in this first example of A equals C, both A and C are the same value. So this expression evaluates to true. However, in the second example, the triple equal operator requires both the value and the type to match. So as C is a string, it doesn't match and it returns false. I'll now give you just a moment to review the output from the remaining expressions to ensure that you understand them. Now it's time to put our theory into practice. Comparison operators are commonly used in conditional statements to compare values and take an action depending on the result. We'll be exploring statements in a later module today, but in this simple example, we're using an is less than comparison operator to compare the year property of the car object with the number 2020. And as 2018 is less than 2020, the result will be set as old car. So again, let's take a look at this in detail. So again, we're talking about statements a bit later, but if we're looking at car is the object and year is the property, so in this case it's 2018, which is less than 2020, then it's going to go and execute the code within it. While comparison operators compare two values or operands, logical operators can be used to join multiple conditions. And there are 3 types of logical operators used in JavaScript: the AND, OR, and the NOT operator. Note that 2 or more logical expressions can be used to evaluate an expression. Let me show you some examples. So here you can see I've set 2 values as variables. A is 5 and B is 10. So let's take a look at this first example. The first one, A is not equal to B, so this evaluates to true, and A is less than B, which also evaluates to true, so the resulting expression will be true. Now in the next example, we've got A is less than B, which is true, and A is equal to B, which is false. However, we're using these 2 pipe characters as an OR. So because the first expression evaluates to true, the result will be true. Now, on this last one, we have 5 is less than 10, which is true. However, we're using this exclamation mark as the not operator to reverse the logic. So the answer is false. Now let's recap on what we've learned by another quick quiz. I'll give you a moment to read this and then identify the correct answer. Let's go and take a look at this together. So you can see that the variable I've declared is car.make. So car make is Volvo. And then I'm using the plus operator. And remember, because I'm working with strings, it performs a concatenation operations when one of the operands is of a string type. So I'm actually concatenating some text here. In this case, it's a space character. And then I'm going in further concatenating the car model. So the correct answer is C, Volvo space XC90. How about this question? Well, here, the car year of 2018 is not greater than 2020. So normally the expression would evaluate to false. However, the exclamation mark is, of course, the not operator, which reverses the expression. So the correct answer is A, true. Now let's discuss conditional statements in JavaScript. Very often when you write code, you want to perform different actions for different decisions, and you can use conditional statements in your code to do this. In JavaScript, we have the following conditional statements. If is used to define a block of code to be executed if the result of a condition evaluates to true. Else defines a block of code to be executed if the same condition is false, just like a fallback value. And else if defines a new condition to test if the previous condition is false. And finally, the switch statement is used to define many alternative blocks of code to be executed. Now, I've included this switch statement here, once again, for sake of completeness, but this is really beyond JavaScript fundamentals. In reality, you typically use it for advanced scripting use cases in server-side JavaScript. So we won't be covering this in our session today. However, if you want to learn more about the JavaScript switch statement, then you'll find many online examples and tutorials on this statement, which you can go and search for. So let's go and take a look at the if statement first. So the if statement will only execute code contained within it if the statement condition evaluates to true. So the curly braces that we see here are used to contain the code for execution, also known as a block quote. So here's an example of the statement syntax. Let's now take a look at some examples of how it could be used. In this example, we're setting a variable of hour as 9, and we set our statement here to go and check if the hour is less than 12. And in this case, the hour variable is less than 12, so the code within it will be executed. So the greeting variable will be set to good morning. The else statement is exclusively used in conjunction with an if statement, and it provides a fallback condition if no other statements evaluate to true. So here we've gone and set our hours 2 p.m. or 14, and we've got a test here. So if 14 is less than 12, then which it's not. So in this scenario, as 14 is greater than 12, the first condition is ignored and the fallback condition is used, setting the greeting variable to good day. Now, the else if statement in JavaScript is used to specify a new condition if the previous condition evaluates to false. So let's take a look at this code. So here we can see that the first expression of 14 is less than 12, that's evaluates to false. And so let's have a look at the second one, else if 14 is less than 18, which it is. So this evaluates to true, and the greeting variable is set to good afternoon. Note it's important to understand that when a condition, or as soon as a condition evaluates to true, then subsequent conditions will be ignored. As JavaScript, like any other scripting language, is evaluated from top to bottom. So in this example, we have our variable of 23, and let's look at the highlighted green boxes here. So 23 is greater than 18. So the good evening variable will be defined, even though the final condition also evaluates to true. Also note that while it's common practice to include a closing else statement, it's not required, as we can see in this example. Now let's finish off this unit with a final question. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this question and code. Remember, as I explained before, arrays are zero-based indexes. So the first expression checks if the year variable of 2000 is greater than 2000, which is not. And the second checks if 2001 is greater than 2000, which it is. So the answer is B. Now, in our final topic today, I'll explain loops in JavaScript. Loops offer a quick and easy way to do something repeatedly. In summary, they enable you to iterate over code so you can execute the same block of code multiple times. And there are a few different loop statements available in JavaScript. However, in this course, we'll be focusing on the most commonly used loop in SSJS, which is the for loop. A for loop repeats until a specified condition evaluates to false and comprises of 4 different elements, which are an initializing expression, a condition expression, an increment expression, and a statement. When a for loop executes, the following occurs. So let's go and take a look at this code here. So you can see that I've gone and defined fruit as an array. And firstly, the initializing expression, if any, is executed. So here's the initializing expression. So this expression typically initializes 1 or more loop counters, but the syntax also allows more complex expressions. And the expression can also declare variables, as we see here. This is a very common pattern where I'm setting a variable I to 0. Next, the condition expression is evaluated. And if the value of the condition expression evaluates to true, then the loop statement or statements execute. So, but if the value of the condition is false, then the loop will terminate. So here we're comparing the variable I, which we've just set as 0, and we're using this JavaScript length method to count the number of values in the fruit array, which is 3. So this is comparing it as 0 is less than 3, which it is, and then it will execute the statement. The statement to execute is contained in a block quote or curly braces. And also, if present, the update expression increment is executed after the statement is run. Here we see I++. So in this case, we're using the increment operator to increase the value of the variable by 1. So if the condition is not reached, then the control returns to step 2, and the next loop is executed, where the I variable will be incremented by 1, and the process continues until 3 is reached. And as when it does, as 3 is not less than 3, which is this length of the fruit array, then the statement will terminate. In this scenario, each time the statement is executed, we're outputting some text. So in this case, I'm using the server-side JavaScript call write function to output the array value based on the current index of our I variable. So in this case, it will go and take the first time it runs, we'll go and display Apple. And notice that I've gone and added this \n character, which is a new line character. And each time it loops, it will go and output each item in the array on a new line. So apple, orange, and pear. So also note that in previous examples, I set that index value in the square brackets as a fixed integer, but here we're using a variable, and the increment expression is changing that variable value with each iteration of the loop. Now, this is a very simple example, but you'd use this syntax in the vast majority of SSJS use cases, as we'll see in our examples tomorrow. So that concludes our introductory session today. And we've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you now have a good understanding of what SSJS is, why you'd use it and how you'd use it, and also understand the JavaScript language syntax and fundamentals. As I mentioned before, there's a lot more to JavaScript than what I covered today. But if you understand these topics, then you'll be on your path to proficiency in using server-side JavaScript. So now with the JavaScript theory out of the way, in our next session, we're going to be working in Marketing Cloud, and I'll be introducing you to the different features in SSJS and common use cases. I'll also be introducing you to other JavaScript concepts, including loops and statements, which we'll use to fulfill some real-world scripting use cases. So in the meantime, we've now got plenty of time for questions, so you can feel free to post any questions to the Q&A panel. I can see there a few there, and also the chat panel if you like, but you'll find those in the tray of your Zoom application. So I'm going to go and start my video and have a look at these questions and comments coming through. So the first question is, will the recording and the deck be provided? So we won't be distributing this recording. This is obviously it's a paid course, but we will be distributing the deck. We've actually had that question before on the first course. I kind of acknowledged that it will be kind of a helpful reference source. So after the on the completion of the second course tomorrow, we'll be sending out a follow-up with a link to the deck to all attendees. What's the time of the next session, BST time? It's exactly the same time as this session. So you can head over to cloudkettle.com/blog and you can see those times listed. And Laura writes, is there a way to retrieve the MID using server-side JavaScript instead of having to hard code it? Yeah, the answer is yes. Yes, there is. There's in fact, there's a platform function that enables you to go and do that. Let me go and see. Since we've got the time, I'm just going to jump over to documentation, SSJS platform functions. Most are documented. Some are not, and you'd find examples of them on Stack Exchange, but let's go and take a look, see whether we can find it. But the answer is yes, you definitely can. I use it all the time. And account functions, here's account functions. These are all core functions though, aren't they? Server-side JavaScript, platform functions, that's what I want here. And utility functions, they here? No. Unscript variable function, content syndication functions. Oddly enough, it doesn't appear to be listed here, but I'll go and I'll tell you in just a moment. And show you an example. I think it's client ID, isn't it? Let me go and find it. That's the authenticated member ID. It probably is authenticated member ID returns the member ID of the executing user. So it will be let me just go and good old Google to this authenticated member ID. And SSJS. All right, so there's a similar one for AmScript as well, but yeah, it's platform function authenticated member ID. So I'll just oh, here we go. Find there we go. Platform function authenticated member ID goes and sets the client ID. So bear in mind that obviously in the script activity, it will go and return the MID where that the business unit that the script is running in. For a cloud page, it will obviously be whichever MID is published in the on the cloud page. And you can also use the authenticated enterprise ID to go and get the EID of the parent account if you want. So let's go and take a look at other questions. Plenty in the chat window. Let me scroll down here. Can I explain the triple equal characters again? Absolutely. So let me just go and skip past. I'll just go and back to the logical operators. No, sorry. So yes, these triple equal symbol, it's similar to a double equal symbol, but it has to equal both the value and the type. So in this case, we've got A is a numeric integer, number 5, and C is a string, also 5. And as the values match, but the type is different. So one is a number and one is a string. So this evaluates to false. Yeah, this has some, I guess, more slightly kind of obscure use cases where you want to, I can't think of any good example, but yeah, that's really what it does. If you just want to ensure that you're evaluating a number, for example. And thanks, Ryan, for answering that. Will I be showing the recording of this? I explained that before. Comment on variable scoping. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about that in our session tomorrow. I don't want to get ahead where we'll be going and changing the scope of a variable. But in this introductory session, I'd rather not go into that depth. And can I review the modulus operator? There's a question from Alicia. So absolutely. So the modulus operator, and where's here we go. The modulus operator here. So let's take a look at some examples. So here, let me go and actually do JS fiddle. And let's go and write some code. So let's go and say a JavaScript code. We've got two variables. So we've got var x equals maybe 2 and var y, and let me just zoom in so you can see that, is equal to 11 maybe. And then we're going to look at the say var result equals x modulus y, and then in this case we'll use maybe document. I use console. I use document write result. Let's go and run this code. And the example, the result is 2. So 2 is divided by, well, I got that right. Oh, okay, so one way around, isn't it? Y, I was thinking that doesn't make sense. Y and X. Let's go and X, run this. Y, X. 1, there we go. So obviously, so we've got how many times does, so we've got 2 goes into 11 5 times. So, but there's 1 left over, isn't there? So if I go and change this to 10, then as there are no numbers left over when the number's divided, then the answer should be 0, which it is. Yeah, that makes sense. And so maybe change this to 3. I'd expect the answer here to be 1 because 10 into 3, so it goes 3 times, but there's 1 remaining, and the answer is 1. There we go. Hopefully that's helpful. And Jordan asks, is there a good environment to test SSJS before implementing in Marketing Cloud? So I typically go and use a cloud page, and I'll show you a technique tomorrow to have local code on your computer, and you can either use Dropbox or Box or Google Drive. And in fact, to steal my thunder, I'll just go and share Ivan Razin's blog, which is amscript.xyz, amscript xy, gosh, can't type, xyz or xyz for the US audience. And I'll just go and find Dropbox. And Ivan has helpfully gone and put explained the syntax, how to go and do this for all these different platforms. But essentially, we can go and create a publicly accessible link to our Dropbox file or Google Drive or whatever we're using, and synchronize it in real time to go and test and debug the output. In fact, I'll be using exactly this technique tomorrow. It's really very helpful, if not essential, when using or when writing SSJS for script activities, because the script activities, of course, you can't see the result. So it'd be a very frustrating process kind of without that. So again, we'll be taking a look at that example tomorrow. Is there any time to review the loop, please? Yeah, we got a few minutes, absolutely. So let me go through. I must say the loop is can be one of the hardest topics to understand, but let me, and you know, for I'd say a long time I just copied and pasted just loops without really understanding what it does. So let me go and break this down again for you. So again, we've got I guess, the anatomy of a loop is it contains 4 components, which are listed on the left-hand side here. So firstly, we've got an initializing expression, and then we've got a condition expression, and then a statement to execute, and our increment expression here. So which is optional. Let's go and write some code and see this more perhaps in simpler terms. So let's say that we've got, let's go and write that we're using, I'm just going to go for let's say for 0. So if you've used loops, that's process loops in AMP script, it actually, the syntax is, the structure, should I say, is very similar. The syntax obviously is clearly different. So we're going to firstly define our initializing expression, and I'm just going to go and put a semicolon here, and then we've got the condition to evaluate is, well, no, let's go and set this as a variable for var I equals 0. So we're setting the variable I as 0, and then our condition to evaluate is, let's say we're going to loop through this 5 times. So we're going to say I is less than the number 5. And if it is, then we're going to execute this code within it. So in this case, we're going to go and write, say, document write in the case of plain JavaScript. I'm going to output number text number, and then I use that plus arithmetic operator to go and concatenate the value of I, and then final, we want to go and increment the expression. So let me just go and actually run this. I'm just going to run. It just does 1 because we need to increment. So if I just do the increment operator here, there's a missing part, and click run again. No, why is it not working? It's not doing it at all. For I, it's obviously some syntax issue I've got going on here. Looks okay to me. What have I got wrong? I can assure you I did go and test this code, but for var page unresponsive. Okay, there's kind of something doesn't expected matched should match. Anyway, you've kind of got me stumped here, and there's an issue with JS Fiddle. So I think I'll just go back to this expression here. But yeah, hopefully that helps explain the anatomy. I think that once you start using it, and as we'll do tomorrow, it will start to make more sense. So let's go back to any other questions, chat. Yeah, no, I don't think it is a semicolon after that increment operator. It's a bit weird. Any others? No, I think that's all the question that we've had for today, and we're almost up at time. So thank you once again for attending. Once again, as a reminder, our next session, we're going to be diving into server-side JavaScript. Is scheduled at the same time tomorrow. I hope you can join me. And until then, enjoy the rest of your day or evening.